Hello and welcome to the FMCC webinar, Asset Document Control, the underestimated low-hanging fruit. Maximize your benefits through an effective document collaboration. Presented today from Germany and the Netherlands with Markus Groll and Gert-Jan de Kieviet. Next slide, please. And I do want to let everyone know they have been muted for audio quality. If you do have any questions during this webinar, please type them into the question box, and I'll be happy to review them during the Q&A portion at the end of the webinar. Also, this webinar is being recorded, and a copy will be made available on the FMCC website at a later date. If you do want a PDF copy of the PowerPoint, one is available now in the control panel. You simply go to the handout section, and you can download it now. Next slide, please. The FMCC likes to let everyone know what their mission and their vision is. Next slide, please. And the FMCC provides many services to the FM community, such as Ask the Expert, find a consultant, locate a speaker, and online educational resources. You may find more information at their website, fmcc.ifma.org. Next slide, please. As always, we would like to thank our sponsors, and one of our newest sponsors is GFMA, so we'd like to thank them. Next slide, please. And what's bringing us all together here today is celebration of World FM Day, which we're actually kind of making more into World FM Week. So we're happy to have you. Next slide, please. The FMCC, in honor of this day, has put together a virtual conference of over 30 sessions that had started on Monday, and we're working through today as the final day. And we're happy you can join us today for it. We have 2 more sessions after this one, so if you could join us for that, that'd be wonderful. Next slide, please. And this is just a snapshot of the presenters that we have had over the week and the still remaining 2 sessions. Thank you. Next slide. At this time, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our first presenter, Markus Groll. Markus, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Joshua, for your kind introduction. My name is Markus Groll. I'm based in Frankfurt, Germany. I'm a registered architect, and I'm working as an architect since 1998. Due to that fact, I had a lot of experience in case of documentation and data document collaboration, and that is the main reason we are doing this webinar today. My co-presenter is Gert-Jan de Kieviet. He has more than 30 years experience of senior management as CEO, COO, Vice President, Sales and Marketing, board international and intercultural experience. He has a full IT scope from mainframes in the late 80s up to enterprise content management since 2002. From 2004 onwards, focused on engineering, document control, and collaboration. Since 2011, he is at Cadet Group, the global market leader in Microsoft SharePoint-based engineering, document control, and collaboration solution. He's a co-founder with me in the CIC community, a platform to provide consultancy services and document control on document control and collaboration. I will take over the first part. So our agenda for today is first to highlight what is the reason for document control on the view of a facility manager. Gert-Jan will take over from point second. Asset information management, asset life cycle, information management, maturity, something about a word I really like, it's the Excel health, since I experienced it since Excel is on the market. And we are talking about your requirements, a bit about CIC community, and at the end of the session we will have a Q&A. And as Joshua already mentioned, you can type your question into the chat box, and he will forward the questions in the Q&A session. The learning objectives are: what are the benefits of document control and collaboration solutions? Point 2, how do I effectively implement such a solution? What are the typical pitfalls I have to watch for? And number 4, what are the future trends about document control and collaboration? I want to start with 3 cases of my life as an analyst in case of quality of documentation, of the documentation which is needed for operation is from 1998. It was an insurance building, approximately 85,000 square meter, and the insurance tried to implement a CAFM system, and while doing that, they faced that the documentation is absolutely wrong and not as spelled. So the handover of the building was 2 years ago, and so they tried to get an updated documentation from the former contractor, and it brought a real delay in the entire project. So that's one case of thousands, I think, around the globe. Case 2, I have been working as a service provider in Dubai for a bank, and when we started there, nearly no documentation was available. Even if the defect liability stage, which is 1 year in Dubai, was already over. So we also had again the problem how to gather all the missing documentation in order to be able to operate the building. It was approximately 6 years ago. And the last case, another 5 years later, was in Baku, Azerbaijan. It was a residential and commercial building, and approximately 500,000 square meter. And again, the question, we started to work there, we had to operate the building, and the situation was already bad. They had a document controller and a document controlling system, but nevertheless, it was quite hard to get the right documents at the right time in advance before we start to operate the building. All these examples which have been shown could be exceeded, and I could tell stories, I think, for weeks about such projects. And the question is always why we have very often a lack of the documentation. And I think the one of the facts is that the stakeholders very often have no idea which documents are required for operation, especially the designers and the engineers. They are doing the documentation for construction, but and you will be bombed with a huge amount of documentation, but to filter out the real important documents which are necessary for operation is sometimes really a huge challenge. On the other hand, there's very often a real important point forgotten in case of the contracts, between contractors, designers, and the landlord, that there's no clear definition in the contracts which documentation is required at the handover of the project. Further possible causes could be that there's very often a very weak communication between the design offices and the contractor companies, because they are all trying to get their job done, and they are not focused on that, and since the contract is weak, they leave it away, and they don't execute it. And another thing is, and it's really, if you need to dive deeper in that, what is the documentation in general? If you don't have a clear guideline to what is required as documentation, they think we did our drawings. The drawings are not, in very often cases, not up to date, but they give you a CD, or today it's saved in the cloud, wherever, and it's done. But the operator, the service provider, which will take over, has mainly a huge problem to gather all the information in order to be able to operate the building. Very often also for that goes more in the direction that the quality of the documentation, that very often draftsmen don't really know how to handle that tool, how to handle their interfaces. They're working with different CAD systems, for example, and very often I have found a situation that the whole drawing is coming to the next system of the engineers with as one piece instead of a detailed layer structure. So what we have experienced is that it's highly recommended to start the controlling already in the earlier stages, and not to wait till at the end of the project and then see what is delivered, and to see from the early stages what is the quality of the data, of the documentation, and then to adjust. Okay, it might be necessary that we need to have more in that detail or that drawing, whatever. And another thing is that in Germany we have some rules which is giving the percentage for documentation of an architect in a very low amount. It's 3% of the entire fee is getting. So they very often say, okay, why I should do the documentation is 3%, forget it, I want to do the next project. And so they don't do the most important job at the end of the project, and sometimes the landlord or the developer decides, okay, we don't need this to pay the 3%. We want to save money because we lost, we had some additional costs in other parts of the projects, and then it's done. So that have been a lot of the causes which are leading to that situation. So from especially my experience together with Gert-Jan, we are working in some projects together which are mainly related to plant engineering. And the situation in plant engineering is absolutely different to the construction world. In plant engineering, everything is predefined and agreed upon before any work is executed. In construction, we start step by step. The scope, we are doing design drawings, then especially here in Germany, they are doing minor detailing and so on, so that they really don't know until a really late stage what is the product which will come out of our design. And so my opinion is that construction world should learn more from plant engineering in case of quality, in case of processes, of documentation, and so on. What are the main challenges for FMs concerning the field of operation and documentation? Documents are missing, documents are not up to date and not as built. The documentation is not structured properly. The documents don't have the right format. There's redundancy, multiple copies, or the assets are over-documented. They are going to an asset taking 50 photos, but you don't know which photo is the right one. So what is required to secure a proper documentation of the entire life cycle, asset life cycle? You need to have a proper defined documentation process, because if the workflow is not clear, there will be also a delay or something like that. You need to have clear responsibilities. Who has to deliver what? You need to define the documentation scopes. What needs to be documented? And that should be clear at the stage where you're signing a contract with your supplier. You need to define the documentation quality. What should be the content? It's really important that you know, okay, I have this HVAC asset or that with type of window and so on. So you should also define which tools you are used. Are you using a cloud-based solution in order, and everyone has to use it? It should be also part of the contract. And as mentioned earlier, there should be a stakeholder who is controlling the progress and the process from the early stage. And also my experience, especially if we are talking about documentation quality, is that all participating stakeholders will need to have a bit of a training, and the training not in usage of the tools they are using. They need training in order to get a common understanding what needs to be done, what needs to be documented. All of these parts should be defined in a documentation guideline, which is part of a contract. So what I want to highlight at the end is a bit the difference between document control and document quality control. Today, we just want to talk about document control and not document quality control, because that is the cheaper part of documentation. It's better to have the documents in a structured manner and all documents available than to have nothing. If you want to have a higher quality, you need to pay more attention, to pay more money, and that's also a process which can be discussed in a separate webinar from my point of view. So I want to hand over now to my colleague, Gert-Jan.
Okay. Joshua, Markus, thanks. And for a basically a non-FM guy, it's quite an honor to be part of World FM Day and to join one of the sessions as a co-presenter, and very much appreciated. Yeah, I'm going to start with what is asset information management. You'll see the definition. It's basically taking care that you're effectively managing all your information, and information is not just documents. We'll very much focus on documents today, but it's data and documents. That you effectively manage that during the full life cycle of an asset, and ultimately the objective is to improve the asset's performance and efficiency. And I've seen examples where really a good and proper documentation, a good and proper document control, the benefits and the ROI of such an investment is I've seen examples massive. Next slide, please, Markus. This is the typical, and there are probably hundreds of. What I wanted to say in advance. As I said, I'm not really an FM guy. I'm from the document control, engineer document control. I've done projects in basically all the different areas. I've done projects in residential building, in office buildings, hospitals, airports, but the last couple of years I've focused very much on plant engineering, and I must say, and I must confirm what Markus already said, that the differences are significant. And if you see the asset life cycle, this is a typical asset life cycle. You develop the asset, you build the asset, you hand over commissioning the asset, and ultimately after a couple of whatever months or years, the asset is going into operations and maintenance. And during the whole life cycle, documents are produced. However, Markus, next slide please. However, the vast majority of the documents is obviously produced during the design phase, less during the construction, basically hardly anything during commissioning, and then again during operation and maintenance, documents are produced again. The number of changes is also reducing during the life cycle of a document, during the life cycle of an asset, regardless if that's similar to throughout the industry. So it's similar for a hospital, or for an airport, or for a petrochemical plant, or for an office building, or residential buildings. So the number of changes is reducing if the life cycle go as far as the life cycle goes. The funny thing, however, is, and just as a side remark, if I see a plant, petrochemical plant, yes, there are loads of document controllers during the design and the construction phase. Then most of them will leave during commissioning, but even during operation and maintenance, they're still permanently one or two or three, depending on if it's a nuclear power plant, or if it's a petrochemical plant. But during the operation and maintenance phase, there's always a team of document controllers available. I've never seen that in a hospital. I've never seen that in an airport. Nah, I'm lying. I've seen that once in an airport. I've never ever seen that in a residential building or in an office building. So apparently, in certain areas, in certain asset areas, once the asset goes into operation, suddenly the importance of documentation seems to disappear. Markus, next slide, please. Yes, okay. So, and it has to do, I think, a bit with information management maturity. There are loads of studies on information management maturity, and the key parameters that you have to discuss with an organization to see how mature they are is organization. Who are you? Is there a clear information strategy available? Is the structure so in such a way that it would require a clear strategy with regards to information management? Control means is there a clear requirement to control your information, or is anyone allowed to do what he wants? And I can give you examples. It's amazing. Anyone is using its own hard drive. Anyone is using its own OneDrive or Dropbox or whatever. It's completely out of control. Everyone is using anything. Apparently, the organization has no desire to control its information. Are there processes in place? Are people forced to go through a certain process to finish their documentation? If people change in documentation, is there a certain process in place to approve those changes? And I've seen too many organizations where that's completely not in place. There's nothing. On the other hand, if you look, for example, probably the most extreme is a nuclear power plant. No one in the organization is allowed to make any change to any document, to any drawing, without an absolutely clear review and approval process. And if you don't follow the process, you're out. You're done. Is the organization, what systems are you using? Are you using systems to control your information, or is it just a matter of everyone does what he wants, etc., etc.? Now, still many organizations, and I would say especially in the residential buildings, office buildings, and even larger, more complex things like. I can give you an example. It's an amazing example. One of the larger European railways, I won't mention any name. Once a drawing has been changed, it is literally plotted 5 times. It's plotted 5 times, and a guy walks through the corridor with 5 drawings under his arm, and he drops in 5 different offices. He drops the drawing, and he asks for comments. That's the way how this particular railway, that's the system that this particular railway has in place. It's amazing, but it's true. External, how do you interact with your externals? Because today we are living in a global world. We're living in the so-called extended enterprise. Nothing is happening in the company itself anymore. It's happening outside. A lot of things are happening outside of the outside of the borders of the company. If you're changing a document and it's an elevator in a building, you need to ask advice there. You need to have documents from your supplier. You need to have your engineering company helping you. Your architects need to check things. So that it's always an interaction. It's always a cooperation with usually quite a lot of external parties as well as internal departments. Compliance. Is there a lot of regulatory compliances in your company? And obviously again the most extreme example is probably nuclear plants. The number of regulatory compliances for a nuclear plant, it's absolutely amazing. I think one of my experiences, I think the building was the plant was ready, done, and then it took 3 years, nothing else than to get all the compliances and to get all the signed off compliances by I don't know how many different authorities. And last but not least, strategy is an important thing. Do you have a strategy? Do you have an information management strategy? And what does it look like? Is it just one single guy that thought, oh, hey, this is a nice way to secure my job? Or is it something that, as was Markus already presented, is it something that is really top-down driven? Is there an executive support? Is there an executive sponsorship for this particular strategy? So those are the things that ultimately determine how ready are you for a more professional information management approach. Markus, next slide. Yeah, two figures. This is a very recent study of AIM. AIM is the one of the leading organizations worldwide in information management. They did a quite an extensive study during the most of 2016 and early end of 2016. They published a study, and one of the, in my belief, yeah, amazing figure. 60% of all the participants to the study said one of our key objectives in the future is to track and monitor information sharing. Information is shared more and more, not just in the organization, but as I said before, also outside of the organization. And we have no idea where it is. We have no idea who is doing what. We have no idea who is sharing with whom. So 60% of the organization, which is actually very disappointing in my belief. 60% is, for 60%, this is one of the key objectives for the future. Markus, next slide. And 38% have recognized, at least that's a good thing, they've recognized that yes, information sharing is not just anymore within the organization. It goes more and more, it goes outside of the organization. It's information sharing with externals, advisory consultancy firms, etc. 38% of the respondents said yes, that's something we need to take care of, and we see that growing and growing. Markus, next slide. An interesting funny example. I was not part of it. I was partly involved with a particular consultancy firm. I won't mention the name, and it's not about this particular airport. It's just an example, so I can be clear on that. But a consultancy company got the order to do a feasibility study on a new airport. It had to be built somewhere in Europe, and they started to they made a team. They created a team internally, and they already figured out quite early that they needed quite a lot of external expertise. So they had lots of expertise from all over the world, that helped them in making that feasibility study. So the document, it was just a feasibility study. So the end result was just one single document, and some of the consultants used OneDrive, some of the consultants used Dropbox, some of the consultants just used email. So after a few months, basically no one was aware anymore what is actually the version you worked on. It was an absolute chaos. I think it took them about 2 or 3 months extra than scheduled, just because of that information management chaos. They just didn't organize themselves properly, and documents flew over the world with all kinds of different systems. Nothing was properly coordinated, and yeah, that's just one particular document that had to be produced for one particular project. Just imagine a bit of a project. I've done airport projects quite a lot. You're talking about, my God, you're talking about 150,000, 200,000 documents. Imagine you're doing it in such a way. It's chaos. And for those who know, one of them, the Berlin airport is already 5 years in delay and will probably never be there. Good, Markus, next slide. That's the Excel hell that Markus likes so much, because it's even actually, you try to implement a system. I've seen them a lot. The Excel document controllers, they try to put everything in an Excel table, and when document 20,000 is there, no one has any idea anymore, because the Excel, you can't control that with Excel. It's impossible, and that's what we call the Excel hell. Markus, next slide. How beautiful would it be if you have all those documents in one single system? Look here as an example. It's a client that I know very well. They have a completely full control over the as-built documentation. All the as-built documents are in one single repository. And if you see on the left hand side, you can the particular asset has been broken down into areas, and for each area, show me all the current as-built, show me all the new as-built, show me all revisions. I don't want to see the latest revision. I want to see all revisions. Show me the handout requests. I'm coming back to that later on. So everything, all the documentation of that particular asset is concentrated, is in one single library, is in one single area. So that company doesn't have any problem to find anything. That's, I would say, the 180 degrees opposite to the Excel hell. Marcus, next slide. So it's talking about pitfalls. It's extremely important when you start thinking about, okay, this is probably a real issue. I need to do something. You have to consider yourselves very, very well. Okay, where am I? And we went already through the slide, the maturity slide. So if you want to go to that slide yourself, you can easily define, okay, how mature, how information management mature am I? How information management immature am I? But you also have to decide, which is one of the key things. Do I want the system? Do I want a system, whatever the system is, to drive my document life cycles? Because documents go through a life cycle. It's not just someone writes something, they go to a life cycle. Someone is producing the document. Then the document goes to very often to a sort of QA check. Then the document goes to a review process. And then ultimately someone needs to sign off the document. Yes, I agree, this is the document, this is the final version. Do you want that process to be driven by a system, or do you want to have the flexibility that each individual user can define, okay, now I need to ask that colleague for an advice. Now I need to ask that external party for an advice. Now okay, I've got those advices, I'm happy with it, now I need to go to my boss and ask for an approval. So some systems, there are systems that can fully manage your document life cycles, but very often the organization is not ready for that because there's a mismatch. Yes, there are also systems, very easy systems, that just give each individual person the ability to set out tasks to all kind of in and external people as needed. Yeah? Do you want to include externals? Do you want I think, to be honest, in our world, in the engineering, architect, FM world, I think there's nothing happens anymore without externals. So you're working with all kind of organizations. So if to me a client says no, I don't want to include my externals, then my first answer is always, okay, so you don't work with externals? Yes, I work with externals, but someone sends them an email, and sometimes I get an email back, sometimes I never get a reply. I said, okay. I understand why it's such a chaos in your organization. Yeah? So with today's technologies, a fact is that you work with externals today, but also a fact is that with today's technology, it would be ridiculous if you don't include externals to your system. You can easily manage that with your system. You don't need any particular thing like OneDrive or Dropbox or email or whatsoever. Yeah? Does your engineering document management system need to be integrated with other software? Also a very important thing you need to consider. I have an example, and Marcus knows the example very well because we work both on that particular client. At that particular client, the whole document management system is integrated with SAP. So when the client orders a new elevator, in the purchase order of that elevator, it is clearly written what documentation is expected from the supplier of the elevator. Once the purchase officer pushes the button and sends out the purchase order, automatically the tasks to provide those documents are created in their document control system. So that's a very, very, very I would say, advanced level of integration. There's no manual step to do that. So the purchase officer is pushing the button. Yes, purchase order can go out, and then automatically, without any manual help, the system is creating the request for those documents in the document management system. Markus, next slide. Click a few. The last 2 or 3 slides, I think, is something very particular. We talked about engineering. We talked about plant engineering. Something which I learned to know as a very critical issue in plant engineering, and to be very honest, I've never seen it anywhere outside, is you have your asset. During the life cycle of your asset is in operation. During the life cycle of your asset, there are many projects going on, small maintenance projects, small modifications, sometimes larger projects, and an additional building is added or whatever. So during the life cycle of your asset, a lot of changes are going on, and very often it happens. You have your document repository. So this is already a very mature client. It has its full document repository of all its as-built documentation. But during the operations phase, many of those projects need the same documentation. So what do you do? What do you do when how do you manage that? Because I've seen examples where it wasn't managed. So all those different projects got the same documentation, and they started to change. They started to change the drawing, and they started even to order equipment based on that changed drawing, and they were absolutely unaware that some of the other projects made also changes to that drawing in exactly the same equipment that was ordered already by project 1. So there are solutions, and that's very interesting to see how sophisticated plant engineering is handling that. And Markus, if you go to the next slide. So no, this one, don't click yet. Just go back. Yeah. So this here you have on the left-hand side, you see here the document repository that you already saw before in several versions. So there is in the as-built repository, there's a drawing called Rev0. So next click. There's a project in that asset, and again, that could be a hospital, could be an airport, could be a nuclear plant, but it also could be an office building, a large office complex. So there's a project going on, and that project requires Rev0. Next click. So the system is automatically handing out Rev0 to that project. Then next click. There's a second project going on, and that second project also requires Rev0. Click. But you can't give it the same name, 0A, so it's called click. It's called 0B. Now the second project is ready. They've made their changes and it's done, it's approved, and blah blah blah. So the second project is now the first one that pushes back the new as-built version to the document repository. Click. Which is Rev1. So Rev0 is now obsolete. Rev1 is the new one. Automatically then a system can notify project 1, hey, you guys, watch out, there is a new Rev1. Click. So please change your 0A for 1B, because this is the version that you have now to work on. Until the moment that project 1 is ready, click. Yeah, and it's 1C, and then go back to one last click, which ultimately delivers revision 2. So there are systems that can manage such, sometimes for some organizations it seems like horribly complex, but actually it's very easy, and there are systems that can really support you managing what we call concurrent engineering, those type of things. Next slide. I think I'm done. Not really. Okay. Yeah, this is just an example of a dashboard of a system. Imagine how beautiful it would be if you're an FM manager and you have a control over all your documentation. Okay, what is where? Who is using what? I have deadlines on my modifications. Who already is in delay? Who is in time? Blah blah blah. So there are really good systems in the world to help you making your information management far more professional than it probably is today. That's what I wanted to present. Thank you very much. If you have questions, I'm more than happy to answer them.
Great, thank you. Both of you, is interesting. We do have a few questions here. One is, what is the relationship between your solution and the new developed BIM environment?
Yes, I can say something about it. It can be okay. That's already I would say that's a presentation of at least an hour extra, but I won't do that. There are several ways we've done BIM integration. One way to give you an example. Let's say when I have to say something different. When the whole design world was 2D, the traditional document management systems were able to cope with that. And I know solutions that could handle XREFs. I know solutions that could handle all kinds of things with 2D. Now we're in 3D and 4D and 5D and complex models. Complex models, let me be very clear on one thing. Complex models, 3D models, Revit models, for example, do not belong in an engine in a traditional document management system. So most of the CAD vendors have their what they call PDM systems. In the example of, for example, Autodesk. Autodesk has a product called Autodesk Vault. So what we've done, we've built an integration between Autodesk Vault and Microsoft SharePoint, just as an example, but there are many more examples available in the market. So basically, you're running your model, you're making your model in Revit, you're creating your model in Revit. The model is stored in Vault. Once you change the status of your model, for example, from work in progress to for approval, the model is rendered into a PDF. It is pushed into the document management system, and automatically an approval process is started in the system where people need to review and approve that drawing without having the native Revit software. That's part of the integration, but there are many more things, many more integration levels, but that's an example of how such a document control solution is part of a BIM level 2 solution. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Another question we have is, when we share externally, say for use by emergency services by fire and police, excuse me, the pertinent documents must be correct and useful. Do you know of any approaches and examples for document control and training for those external parties in emergency services?
In emergency services? No, I've certainly understood.
Like fire, EMC,
Okay.
From my point of view, it's just another external party into the entire environment.
I know the example, and I know one example of a nuclear plant, and that's again the most extreme, probably the most extreme environment you can imagine when talking about document control. And I know that all the emergency service, actually I know another example, which was an airport, where all the emergency services had direct access to that as-built repository that I showed you before. So there was one single as-built repository, and all the emergency services, both in that nuclear plant as well as in that airport, had access to that. And very much, how you call it, security trimmed. So there were metadata on the documents, and I'm not sure exactly how it was called, but just loudly thinking, I assume that one metadata was fire or what do you call it, ambulance or whatever. So through metadata, the system determined to which documents did the fireworks had access to which documents had the medical services had access to, etc., etc. So that was really that was very well managed, very well managed.
Great, thank you. Those are the questions that I have, and their contact information is on the current slide. So if you want to reach out to them, you can do so directly. Next slide, Marcus. Okay, we have another session coming up on the fatal flaws in your workplace, active shooter response with Bo Mitchell. He's always very interesting and very informative in this area. I've attended some stuff of his as well. And then our wrap up, where Marcus will be back with some of the other people that have participated in the conference for the last 4 days. Next slide, please. The FMCC does have an app available in iTunes and also Google Play. So it's all in iPhone format and Android. I encourage you to download that. Next slide, please. And if you have any ideas or want to be a presenter for a webinar, have an idea for a white paper, etc., we'd love to have you volunteer for the STAG team. And you can contact Ricardo. His contact email is on this slide on your screen. Next slide, please. And the FMCC always likes to help bring attention to the other councils and communities that are here at IFMA, and they can serve as a great resource for their particular field or industry. Next slide, please. And that brings us to the end. I want to thank Gert-Jan and Marcus for a very informative presentation. I want to thank everyone for joining us for another wonderful World FM Day presentation. Have a great one, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Josh.
Thank you.